My name is Sophie. The story I'm about to tell happened a few years ago when my best friend and I were roommates. We shared a small 2-bedroom apartment in the Lower East Side of New York City. It was a pretty old place on the 5th floor of a 5-story walk-up. One of the reasons we loved it was the massive living room window that looked straight out at the city skyline. Right next to our building was another structure that was only 4 stories high. Since our apartment was 1 floor higher than the building next door, we always felt like we were in an untouchable fortress. When we looked out the window, the only thing across from us was the flat rooftop of that 4-story building. We figured, at this height, who could possibly look in? That overconfidence made us extremely careless. We rarely bothered to close the blinds, and we often left the living room window wide open to catch a breeze, even when we were changing or sleeping. Until one night. It was a fairly quiet night. We were both in our own rooms, getting ready for bed. I had just finished changing when I suddenly heard a massive thud from outside. It was a heavy impact, like something big had just fallen from a great height. A few seconds later, I heard my roommate's panicked voice. "Sophie, did you hear that?" We both rushed into the living room. Our first instinct was to check if a bookshelf or a vase had fallen over, but everything in the apartment was exactly where it belonged. The silence that filled the room afterward felt thick and terrifying. We looked toward the wide-open window. A bad gut feeling forced me to walk over to the ledge and look down into the narrow alleyway that separated the 2 buildings. Down there, under the faint glow of the streetlights 5 stories below, I was horrified to see the dark shape of a man lying sprawled out and motionless on the pavement. My roommate immediately grabbed their phone to call the police. I stayed by the window, my eyes glued to the dark shadow lying in the alley. About 10 minutes later, we heard sirens in the distance. A patrol car pulled up in front of the building, and several officers quickly headed into the alley. I watched them lean down to check on the man. After a few minutes, one of them stood up and shook his head. Then, they started taping off the area. My roommate and I just looked at each other. We didn't need to say anything because we both knew what had happened. A heavy silence settled over the apartment. A little while later, the police knocked on our door to ask some questions. They wanted to know if we had heard or seen anything unusual before the man fell. We told them exactly what happened. The officers took down our information and left. A few days later, the police contacted us again to share the initial results of their investigation. What they told me sent a chill down my spine. According to the scene reconstruction, the man died instantly when he hit the ground. But the most disturbing part was what they found on the roof of the 4-story building next to us. There were multiple sets of footprints on that roof, showing that someone had been moving around up there during the night. The investigators also found a long drag mark in the dust and moss on the rooftop, like something long had been hauled across it. That something was a wooden plank. The plank was found in the alley, not far from the man's body. After putting the clues together, the police reached a conclusion that made my blood run cold. The man had been standing on the roof of the 4-story building. He had brought a long wooden plank and stretched it across the gap between the 2 buildings to create a makeshift bridge. From there, he intended to walk across and enter our living room through the open window. But the horror didn't stop there. When they checked his phone, the police found dozens of photos of our living room window taken at different times of the day and night. It meant he had been stalking us for quite a while. He knew that window was almost always open, and he had been planning his break-in. Inside his jacket pocket, the police found a small knife. I shivered when I heard that detail. If he had successfully made it across that plank, things would have ended very differently. The police believed that while he was carrying out his plan, he lost his balance, slipped, and fell nearly 5 stories into the alley. He died before he could carry out whatever he intended to do to us. Even though the stalker was dead, our sense of safety was completely shattered. We realized we had been living like creatures in a glass cage for a freak to watch for months. This event left a deep psychological scar. Even after we installed a heavy-duty security system and eventually moved away, the feeling of being watched never truly left me. To this day, whenever I'm home alone, I have a habit of double-checking the window locks a dozen times. I can never sit in a room at night if the curtains aren't pulled tight. My friend and I don't live together anymore, and that building probably has new tenants now. I just feel an immense sense of relief that we never had to face him while he was alive. His death was a tragedy, but for us, it was a terrifying form of salvation. This story happened back when I was 26. It was the lowest point of my life. I had been unemployed for months, my bank account was bone dry, and I was stuck working as a cashier at a convenience store for peanuts. So when my high school friend Orla asked me to move in with her to split the bills, I jumped at the chance. I moved into her place a week later. It was a small 2-bedroom house tucked away in a neighborhood called Sycamore Hills. Right from the first day, I noticed Orla was acting strange. She had these odd habits. She would constantly stare out the window with a look of pure anxiety, and she made a few cryptic comments about how she hated being home alone. But her fear went beyond just talk. Orla practically begged me to put a small mattress on the floor of my room so she could sleep in there with me. I was confused because her own bedroom was great. It was actually much bigger and nicer than mine. She wouldn't give me a specific reason why. She just said she felt safer having someone else in the room. I felt awkward saying no since she was helping me out. In fact, she was letting me slide on the first month's rent, so I reluctantly agreed. I figured I'd let it go for a month and then talk to her about it later. Life in the new house started off okay. Besides the lack of privacy, sharing a room with Orla, everything was fine. One night I worked a late shift and didn't get off until the early hours of the morning. Orla kept texting and calling me, asking exactly when I'd be home. She said she couldn't fall asleep without me there. I started to get annoyed. I felt like I had become a full-time babysitter. I finally pulled up to the house around 2 a.m. As I parked and walked toward the front door, I froze. A woman was standing perfectly still on our front lawn. She was wearing ragged, messy clothes and was incredibly thin. She stood there like a statue. But the part that sent a chill down my spine was that she was staring, unblinking, straight at Orla's bedroom window. I stood there paralyzed for a few seconds before I found the courage to speak. "Excuse me, ma'am? Do you need help with something?" The woman slowly turned her head. The streetlight hit her face, revealing eyes that looked completely empty. She stared at me without saying a word, then quietly turned around and walked away. She didn't make a single sound as she disappeared into the dark. I rushed inside and locked the door tight. When I got to my room, Orla was already curled up on my bed, fast asleep with her phone light still on. I ended up sleeping in Orla's room that night and completely forgot to tell her about the creepy lady on the lawn. 3 days later, the real nightmare began. I got home around 11 p.m. As soon as I walked up to the gate, I knew something was wrong. Orla's car was parked in the driveway, so she was definitely home. But the front door was wide open, and the entire house was pitch black. I tried to flip the light switch in the living room, but nothing happened. I pulled out my phone and texted her, "Are you home? Why is the door open?" A second later, I heard her phone ring, right inside the kitchen. I walked in and felt for the light switch, but that one didn't work either. I turned on my phone's flashlight and saw Orla's phone sitting right there on the dining table. "Orla?" I called out softly. No answer. My heart started thumping against my ribs. I called her name a few more times. Then, I heard a very faint noise coming from upstairs. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed a pair of scissors from a drawer and headed up the stairs. I made my way to the first bedroom. The room was empty, but the sound of breathing was getting louder. I gripped the scissors tight when I realized the sound was coming from inside the closet. I don't know why I was so brave or stupid in that moment. I held the scissors up, ready to defend myself, and reached for the door. The moment I touched the handle, the door burst open. I almost screamed, but a thin, bony hand reached out, covered my mouth, and yanked me inside. It was Orla. She was curled into a ball among the clothes, shaking so violently it felt like she had a fever. "Don't say a word. Call the police, now, please," Orla whispered, her voice trembling so much I could barely hear her. I immediately dialed 911. I waited a few minutes for her to calm down enough to tell me what happened. Orla explained that she was upstairs changing when she heard the front door being kicked in. Someone had broken in, but the intruder didn't turn on any lights or look for things to steal. For 2 hours, the person just paced back and forth in the dark, moving between the downstairs area and the upstairs hallway. "I've been in here for 2 hours, she sobbed. "I could hear their footsteps right outside the closet door. I could hear them breathing right next to me." 5 minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the heavy silence. We sat in the closet and listened to the police shouting and the sound of someone screaming at the top of their lungs. When the police told us it was safe to come out, I saw them pinning a woman down near the garage. It was the same woman I had seen on the lawn 3 days earlier. She looked gaunt, her clothes were filthy, and her hair was a mess. She didn't have any weapons or ID on her. Just like Orla said, she hadn't stolen a thing. She hadn't even touched the valuables. She was dragged away, kicking and screaming, shouting nonsense that no one could understand. The police just shook their heads. They figured she was suffering from a severe mental breakdown. They guessed she might have lived in the house a long time ago. We both agreed to move out immediately. While we were packing, Orla finally confessed that the woman had been stalking her for a while. But because the woman would appear and disappear without actually committing a crime, the police couldn't do anything. Orla was so terrified that she only asked me to move in because she was too scared to be alone. "I'm so sorry. I was afraid if I told you, you'd be too scared to move in," Orla cried as she apologized to me. In the end, I wasn't mad at her. She had helped me when I was struggling, after all. Orla had to go to therapy for a long time, and I didn't fare much better. Even now, I have to check the locks on the door multiple times every single night before I can even think about going to sleep. We still live together and get along great, but we are both still haunted by that night.
My name is Claire. I've been a night shift nurse for 17 years. In that time, I've seen plenty of strange things, but nothing like what happened here. It changed my life and my job completely. Now, we never talk about Treatment Ward 6 anymore. That ward was shut down 3 years ago. They said it was due to budget cuts, but we all know that wasn't the real reason. Everything started after Mr. Avery died. He had been fully prepared for discharge because all his vitals were stable and there were no concerning medical issues. Yet around 3 a.m. that night, his heart suddenly stopped. When the code team arrived, the atmosphere shifted into something unnatural. Mr. Avery's eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, his mouth frozen mid-scream. The monitor showed a flat line, but his body was still warm, as if something was clinging to him, refusing to let go. After that, strange things began happening. The hallway lights flickered constantly, and the air filled with a mix of antiseptic and a rotten metallic smell. Patients whispered about a strange man standing silently by the windows at night. One security guard quit on the spot after reviewing the ward's camera footage. He didn't say a word, just muttered about all those eyes watching, then left without even collecting his paycheck. Then came the night everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. I was sitting at the nurse's station, finishing patient charts. The hospital was quiet, as usual. Nurse Teresa was sitting across from me, headphones in, listening to music. Suddenly, the overhead intercom crackled with a soft pop, then went silent. I stopped writing and listened, but nothing happened for a few seconds. Then I heard a voice, soft, clear, as if someone were standing right beside my ear. "Claire." My pen slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. My heart began pounding. I glanced at Teresa, but she was still bobbing her head to the music, completely unaware. I waited, telling myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But then the voice came again, clearer, dripping with resentment.
Claire, you let me down.
A cold wave ran down my spine. My hands shaking, I stood up and walked to the intercom controls. I pressed the talk button and whispered, "This is Claire. Who is this?" I held my breath, waiting. No reply. I walked back, trying to steady my voice. "Teresa, did you hear anything?" She removed one headphone, raising an eyebrow. "Hear what? Claire, what's going on?" Before I could answer, the speakers crackled again. But this time, it wasn't a voice. It was breathing. Labored breathing, like someone struggling for their final breaths. Now Teresa heard it too. She took off her headphones completely and stood up. "What the hell? Is someone having an emergency?" I hit the button to shut off the intercom, but the breathing didn't stop. It echoed down the hallway, the sound shifting location, as if moving, from the direction of Treatment Ward 6. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward the sound. Teresa followed close behind. When we approached Ward 6, I froze. The door had been locked and sealed for years, but through the fogged window pane, I saw a shape. It was moving, dragging itself across the floor. Teresa and I panicked, backing away as fast as we could. We agreed not to report it, not wanting to cause chaos among the patients. That night, after my shift ended, I couldn't go home. I needed answers. I went to the security room, which was empty by then. I sat in front of the monitors as I pulled up the footage from Ward 6 from the days before. Everything looked normal at first. Then came the recording at 3 a.m., the exact time Mr. Avery died. The camera jolted violently, and the feed turned into black and white static for several seconds. When the image returned, I saw something impossible. Bed 612, Mr. Avery's bed, was occupied. I hit slow playback. The blanket rose and fell slowly, as if something invisible were breathing beneath it. Then it shifted, something inside moving. Slowly, a figure sat up, the shape of a man, but hunched, his head tilted to one side as if his neck were broken. The heart monitor beside the bed lit up, the ECG showing a steady rhythm, 72 beats per minute. The beeping echoed through the camera's audio, but the real bed, in real life, was empty. I stared at the screen. The figure on the camera slowly turned its head, looking directly into the lens. Its face was completely shadowed, except for two faint points of light, eyes, watching. Then its mouth stretched slowly into a grin. I screamed, fumbling to shut off the monitor, but before I could, I heard a whisper through the computer speakers. "Claire." I yanked the power cord out, screaming. Teresa rushed in, her face pale. "What happened? I heard you scream." I pointed at the dark screen, my mouth frozen. A week later, the hospital officially shut down Treatment Ward 6. But sometimes, late at night, when I walk past that hallway, I still hear the heavy breathing. The intercom still whispers my name in the silence, and occasionally, there's a shadow standing at the end of the corridor, staring at me. We never speak about Ward 6 again.
I remember it was around Christmas time. The air was cold, but the town of Altoona, Iowa, was warm with twinkling lights. I was 16, living with my family and working a part-time shift at the local McDonald's. I usually had to work early morning shifts on weekends. So that night, I went to bed earlier than usual. I lay down, pulled up the blanket, and fell asleep quite quickly. Everything was very normal at first, but in just a moment, I began to feel something was off. Then I started to dream. I was running. Not a leisurely jog, but a frantic flight with my heart pounding. I looked around. It was pitch black, and I was in downtown Des Moines, about a 20-minute drive from my house. Skyscrapers lined both sides of the street, and neon lights from the Christmas-decorated shops reflected on the wet road. I didn't know what I was running from. I only knew that there was a presence chasing me from behind. I couldn't hear footsteps, couldn't hear heavy breathing, but I could feel it. A chilling sensation clinging to the back of my neck, like a nameless shadow. My feet hammered continuously on the pavement. I circled street corners, weaving between buildings, hoping to find a place to hide. My breath was short and ragged. Finally, I quickly turned into an alley, rounding the corner of an old red brick building, and I was forced to stop. Right in front of me stood a man. He stood tall, like a statue. Much taller than me, probably over 6 feet. He wore a long black coat that reached down to his ankles. On his head, he wore a classic top hat, like the ones gentlemen wore in old black and white movies. Beneath the brim, his face was obscured by shadow, but I could still see his eyes. They were abnormally large, almost entirely black. He looked at me with an intensely desirous expression. I stood there, feeling like time had frozen. I stood there, unable to move. Maybe it was just a few seconds, or minutes, I don't know. I only knew that it felt like I was trapped in that moment with those bizarre black eyes staring at me. Then, he slowly reached out his hand. A bony, gaunt hand slowly extended toward me like an invitation. The gesture wasn't threatening, but strangely, as if he was inviting me to follow him. The moment his fingers were about to touch my face, I woke up violently. I shot up, out of bed, my breath coming in short gasps, my heart hammering. I put my hand to my chest, trying to catch my breath and looking around the room. The alarm clock on the table read about 2:30 a.m. Everything was quiet. It was just a dream. I let out a breath, my body still trembling. Wiping my forehead, I found my hand was soaked with cold sweat. I pulled the blanket up, lay back down, and tried to calm myself. But just then, I paused. A white plume of vapor from my breath was clearly visible in front of me. Now I realized the room was incredibly cold. Cold enough that I could see my own breath. That was not normal at all. I jumped up, deciding to check. I placed my feet on the wooden floor, immediately feeling the sharp cold spreading from the soles of my feet up my spine. I hurried to the window on the left side of the bed, which was always closed tight before sleep. Checked carefully. The latch was still fastened, not a single gap. I turned to the opposite wall, where the air vent was placed at chest height. I placed my palm on it, feeling the warm air still blowing steadily. The heating system was working. So why was the room freezing like a cold storage unit? This cold wasn't caused by a draft or a normal temperature drop. It was dense, strange, as if something had dragged it in when it entered the room. A sense of unease began to creep into my mind. Then I suddenly felt the cold air slowly creeping up from the foot of the bed. A shudder ran down my spine. I looked toward the end of the bed, and he was there, the man from the dream. He stood right at the foot of my bed in the dim light of the room. The long black coat, the top hat, and the abnormally large eyes with deep black pupils staring directly at me. He didn't move, just stood there like a statue and watched me. I quickly backed away, cowering, unable to take my eyes off the figure. I tried to gasp for air. What do you want? He didn't answer, but I saw the bony hand slowly raise. The gaunt fingers gently beckoned to me, the same gesture as in the dream. A silent, yet threatening invitation. I grew up in a devout Christian family. I had heard stories about things like this. My parents often talked about demons, about wicked spirits, about how they appear to tempt or torment people. I believed that what was standing in front of me was a demon, an entity from hell that came to harm me. Get out of here right now. I tried to make my voice stronger. He didn't disappear. Instead, I felt like he was moving closer, not by stepping, but by filling the space around me with his coldness. Then his mouth opened, and a thick, raspy voice came out. I didn't understand what he was saying. Then he screamed loudly and piercingly. It echoed in the room, making my ears ring. I covered my ears, closed my eyes, and hunched over. And when I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was still freezing, but I was sweating. I bent down and vomited right onto the wooden floor. My body shook with spasms. After that, I cleaned up the mess, crawled into bed, pulled the blanket up, and curled into a ball. I didn't dare look down at the foot of the bed. I closed my eyes and eventually drifted off to sleep. The alarm clock blared. I woke up with a start and turned it off. The clock read 4:45 a.m. I sat up and looked around the room. Everything was normal. The room was warm, the vent blowing gentle heat. There was no vomit stain, no sign of the cold. Was it just a dream? Was it all just a long, vivid, terrible nightmare? I decided to reassure myself that I was just overly stressed, but it was definitely the most horrible dream I had ever had. Almost 2 weeks passed since that night. Christmas arrived, lights twinkling all over Altoona. I kept reassuring myself it was just a dream. That evening, my parents went to a company party. They left me in charge of watching my sisters. I needed to sleep early for my 5 a.m. shift tomorrow. At 9 p.m., I went up to my room, closed the door, and lay down in bed. I had only closed my eyes for a few seconds when the door burst open. Jingle bells! Jingle bells! My 3 younger sisters stormed in, singing loudly. Emily shook the bells. Sarah and Kate danced around the bed. I helplessly demanded, "Get out!" But they didn't listen, continuing to sing. I pulled the blanket completely over my head, thinking if I ignored them, they would get bored. Then that feeling of coldness hit, exactly like that previous night. The singing of my 3 sisters suddenly went silent. I pulled the blanket down and saw him, the man in the top hat standing in the corner of the room. Long black coat, abnormally large eyes staring directly at me. My 3 sisters stood frozen, mouths agape. He lunged toward me at terrifying speed. The bony hand touched my chest, and instantly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was kneeling on the hallway floor. My head was spinning, and my mouth had a metallic taste. I didn't remember how I got out of the room. The house was strangely silent. Emily? Sarah? Kate? I called out loudly, but no one answered. A small cry came from the bathroom. I ran over, twisted the handle, but the door was locked. "Open the door!" I knocked hard. "Go away." Emily's voice trembled from inside. "You go away." "What are you saying? It's me." "No, Mom and Dad are coming home. Don't touch me." I was bewildered, not understanding what was happening. And when I inadvertently looked down, I saw my fingers were stained with dried blood. I looked at the bathroom door. There were puncture holes. A broken broomstick was jammed deep into the hallway wall, leaving a large crack. I panicked and ran around the house. When I got downstairs to the living room, I was horrified to see a mess. Kitchen knives scattered everywhere, a deep cut in the wooden table, and tears in the sofa. The familiar feeling of nausea hit me. I knelt down and vomited right onto the wooden floor. My body shook with spasms until there was nothing left to throw up. Just then, my parents returned. As soon as they opened the door, they looked at me and yelled, "What happened here?" I couldn't answer. Dad walked straight toward me, grabbed my arm, and slapped my face. "Go to your room right now." I staggered up the stairs, not because of the slap, but because of the extreme confusion. I didn't understand what was happening. The next morning, my 3 sisters walked into the room. They stood far away, afraid to come near. Emily held Sarah and Kate tightly. "Do you remember anything?" Emily asked. I shook my head. "You did horrible things," Emily swallowed. Sarah chimed in. "Your eyes were glowing red like blood flowing out. I was so scared." Kate nodded. tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were possessed." Emily continued, her voice choked. "You stood up and laughed, but your voice was completely different. You chased us. You took knives, throwing them everywhere. We ran upstairs, locked ourselves in the bathroom. You pounded on the door, stabbing the broomstick right through it. I thought you were going to kill us." I sat there feeling my world collapse. "I'm sorry. I don't remember any of it." The door closed. I sat alone, wondering what was happening to me, and if I was even myself anymore. I still remember it clearly, as if everything happened yesterday. I was just a little girl, about 8 to 10 years old. I was shivering from the cold, but couldn't take my eyes off the night sky, trying to spot Santa Claus. My mother sat beside me, holding me close. We lived in a small town, with only 2 neighboring houses nearby. Only Cindy's family was home celebrating Christmas that night, while Megan's family had gone on vacation. The air was bitterly cold. I constantly bothered my mother with questions. "Mom, do you think Santa will bring me the gift I wished for?" My mother smiled gently, saying she wasn't sure how good I had been this year. I suddenly had a burst of inspiration. I jumped out of her embrace, ran towards the dim moonlight, and shouted, "Ho, ho, ho!" I tried to mimic Santa's deep, booming laugh and turned back to look at my mother. She looked at me, and we both burst out laughing. Just then, a slow, dry voice echoed between us. "Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, little girl." I instantly spun around, feeling utterly ecstatic. There he was, Santa Claus. His red suit looked a bit old and dusty, and his hat was tilted to one side, but I didn't care. All I saw was Santa Claus landing in my small town. I ran to him and asked loudly, "Did you bring my presents, sir?" Santa stepped closer. In the freezing air, I smelled an indescribable stench, and a strong odor of alcohol wafted over. Santa replied in a raspy, terrifying voice, "I've got blood right here, kid." I froze at the peculiar answer. Suddenly, I felt a strong pull from my mother. She picked me up, backed away towards the porch, and shouted, "Get away from here now." My mother's voice was trembling, which scared me more than Santa's words, because her reaction was so strange. When he stepped close enough, under the dim yellow light on the porch, I could see clearly. There were dark red dried streaks on his torn red clothes. His beard was scraggly, matted, and some parts were also stained red. He sneered, speaking slowly in a deep voice. "I'm just here to bring joy," and let out a dry, hacking laugh. He was about 3 heads taller than my mother. His enormous, hulking figure was overwhelming. My mother started running while still carrying me in her arms. We only managed a few steps. My mother tripped and fell forward, but managed to turn so I wasn't crushed. Santa quickly grabbed her ankle. She shoved me toward the house door and desperately screamed, "Run, honey! Get inside and call 911 immediately! Hurry!" I was stunned, not immediately reacting to my mother's demand. Santa began wrestling with my mother, trying to hold her down. He punched my mother hard in the face twice, making blood stream from her nose and eyebrow. He stood over my mother, looked straight at me, and laughed a horrifying laugh that echoed in the dark night. I panicked and ran toward the house, but he was much faster than I was. He ran past me and blocked my way. He laughed, his terrifying face leaning close. "What are you going to do now, little girl?" I looked toward the only neighboring house with lights on, Cindy's house. I saw Cindy's husband, Stephen, running out. I screamed desperately, "He hurt Mom! Help!" As soon as I finished speaking, he knocked me down to the ground. Seeing this, Stephen rushed over and loudly demanded that Santa leave. Very quickly, a struggle ensued. Santa was horribly gaining the upper hand. My mother staggered up, ran over, and kicked him in the back. She tried to push, pull, and hit, using all her strength to help Stephen. I also ran over, my small fists barely penetrating his thick fur coat. But he didn't care at all. Stephen was already unconscious. He pulled something shiny from his pocket and stabbed Stephen's abdomen with vicious, heavy blows. Fresh blood flowed down, soaking into the white snow, spreading into a horrific dark red. My mother grabbed my hand tightly and dragged me away to run. I looked back, seeing him continue to stab Stephen many more times in a frenzy. My mother pulled me harder and covered my eyes. We got inside the house. My mother hurriedly locked all the doors, drew the curtains, and screamed for me to call 911 immediately. Meanwhile, she moved all the heaviest furniture like the bookshelf and even the refrigerator to barricade all the windows and the main door. I called 911. I tried to speak coherently, but a desperate, horrifying scream suddenly echoed from Cindy's house. My mother went to the only window not completely blocked, covered her mouth with her hand, then shouted into the phone, "He's killing them! Someone please come here. Please!" After that, the screaming outside stopped, leaving only an icy silence. My mother put the phone down and hugged me tightly. After he had dealt with Cindy's family, he came over and started kicking our door violently. He smashed the windows and tried to punch and push away the objects my mother had used to barricade them. He started throwing his massive body against the front door. My mother held me tight. She was crying and trembling uncontrollably. I stared intently at the front door. It shook violently with every shove from the giant man. I thought it was about to give way. A loud bang sounded, and the protective wall my mother tried to create was breached. The main door flew open, and furniture shattered. Fortunately, the police car lights flashed. They had arrived. But he still didn't stop. The lunatic Santa still charged into the house, even when they used a taser to try and restrain him. Finally, the maniac Santa was subdued by the police and taken away. But the memory of that horrifying Christmas night became a deep scar, haunting me for the rest of my life. The man who attacked us was Joe Sticker. He wasn't a planned killer, but a man kicked out of his home on Christmas night by his wife because of his addiction. In his despair and madness, Joe got drunk and used some extremely powerful hallucinogenic drugs. He wore the old Santa Claus costume, and in his mentally unstable state, he turned into a brutal murderer. He killed 3 people that night: Cindy, her husband Stephen, and their son. The incident destroyed everything. To this day, my mother still avoids mentioning the events of that night. She never decorates the house or the Christmas tree anymore. As for me, every year when the holidays come around, I avoid crowded places. Seeing someone dressed up as Santa Claus, even in an advertisement, will send me into a state of severe panic. I barely dare to step outside in the cold anymore, and eventually, I had to leave my country. I moved to a place with no snow and where people don't celebrate Christmas. That nightmare forced me to go far away, trying to find a peace that I know will never truly be complete again.
I bet nobody ever thinks Valentine's Day could turn into an action movie. But 12 years ago, mine did. I was 16 at the time, and I went through a Valentine's Day so crazy that just thinking about it now still gives me the chills. My name is Stella, and my younger sister Selena is 5 years younger than me. Back then, I considered myself a pretty cool and responsible big sister. That afternoon, my parents headed out for a romantic date night. Before leaving, they left us with a long list of don'ts. No boys over, no playing with fire, and absolutely no fighting. My sister and I nodded along, making them promise only one thing, that they'd bring us back some almond macaroons after their dinner. About 30 minutes later, while I was lounging on the sofa scrolling through Instagram, the doorbell rang. Selena excitedly ran to open it. It turned out she had secretly invited some friends over through Discord. When the two guests walked in, I just stood there frozen because of how weird they were. First, there was Karen. She looked like a normal kid, but she seriously introduced herself as being 67 years old. Even crazier, she was carrying a gun. The second friend, Iris, was even weirder. As soon as she walked in, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything, screaming about how the house was perfect for some skibbity toilet aesthetic. I raised my voice and told them my parents didn't allow strangers over, but Selena argued back that they weren't boys. To keep the peace and avoid getting caught by my parents, I had to compromise. I confiscated Karen's gun, led them all to the living room, served them hot cocoa, and turned on Mario Kart to distract them. I thought I had everything under control, until my phone started buzzing like crazy. A notification from our security camera popped up. The front door was wide open. My heart sank when I realized Selena hadn't locked the door after her friends arrived. I was about to go check it out when a second notification hit. On my screen, a large, dark shadow just moved through the main hallway. He was inside our house. I signaled the three kids to be quiet. We crept out of the room, with me leading the way and the three girls following close behind like a terrified little train. In the kitchen doorway, a large man in a black hoodie was standing there. The dim kitchen light cast eerie shadows on the floor, making his face look distorted and terrifying. Then, he casually walked to the fridge and started stuffing food into a bag like he was shopping at a grocery store. He even muttered to himself about grabbing a few valuables before leaving. I stood there paralyzed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Our home was being invaded, and that jerk was currently chewing on the last strawberry donut I had been saving. I was shaking, partly from anger, but mostly from pure terror. Iris whispered, "Call the police." But Selena immediately protested. She was terrified our parents would find out she didn't lock the door and invited friends over. Karen added, "The cops around here are slow anyway. By the time they get here, he'll have cleared the place out and vanished into thin air." In that do-or-die moment, a wild idea flashed through my head. If Kevin McAllister could defend his house alone, why couldn't we, 4 girls, do it too? We retreated to the bedroom to make a plan. I assigned tasks at lightning speed. Selena ran upstairs to grab all the baby oil and ice cubes from the mini fridge. Iris and Karen searched for rope or anything that could act as a barrier. Karen wanted to use the gun she brought, but when I looked closely, it looked very strange. Karen grinned and told me it was just a gun-shaped lighter meant for scaring people. Since that wasn't very practical, I decided I'd use my heavy metal thermos to hit him. We quickly split up to set the traps in silence. The thief was still in the kitchen. I could hear the occasional clink of a soda can and the sound of packaging being ripped open. Selena and I poured baby oil all along the hallway connecting the kitchen to the living room. Karen and Iris stretched rope across the path at the very end of the hall, tying it tight to the table legs and sofa arms. Baseball bats, the thermos, and even a heavy wooden doll were lined up as weapons. Once the traps were ready, I hid behind the sofa, took a deep breath, and screamed at the top of my lungs. "Burglar! The cops are on the way! You're trapped!" The thief jumped. He stepped out of the kitchen, looking annoyed. But instead of running away, he held his hands up and tried to stay calm, shouting, "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt anyone. I'm just taking some food and a few things and then I'm gone." Selena poked her head out from behind a curtain and yelled to provoke him, "You ugly, hungry pig!" His voice turned cold. He dropped his bag of food and charged toward the living room in a fit of rage. But on his very first step, his feet flew out from under him on the baby oil. He slammed into the wall, struggling to find his balance. When he tried to lunge forward again, his legs caught the rope stretched across the hall. His entire massive body went flying onto the floor. We all cheered and charged. Using everything we had prepared, we hit him relentlessly. He yelled and rolled around, trying to fight back. One of his kicks almost hit Selena in the face. Seeing my sister almost get hurt made me snap. I started screaming at him and pulled out my final weapon, pepper spray. I aimed right for his eyes and held the button down. He shrieked, rolling back and forth in pain. We used the leftover rope to tie his hands and feet tight. Karen stood over him with her gun lighter, ready for anything. "Don't move, or this 67-and-a-half-year-old is gonna shoot." I pulled out my phone to call 911. My voice and hands wouldn't stop shaking. Truthfully, we were still terrified. I told the operator there was an intruder in the house and that we had him tied up, begging them to hurry. The police burst in and couldn't believe their eyes. A large, grown man tied up by 4 young girls. My parents ended their date early and rushed home after getting the call from the police. We got a serious lecture and had to clean the entire house. My mom was a mess. She said we were lucky the thief was only after property. If he had been carrying a gun or a knife, we could have been in grave danger. Since that night, my sister and I officially became best friends with Iris and Karen. Looking back on what my mom said, I realized just how much danger we actually put ourselves in. It's a memory that's both funny and absolutely terrifying to us now. As for you, call the police as soon as you possibly can. Don't try to be a hero unless you are absolutely sure you are safe. My name is Logan. I'm 45 years old, and I used to be a construction engineer in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, I'm just a broken man living off the bottle. My wife passed away a few years ago. After I lost her, my life completely fell apart. I needed a quiet place to hide from the painful past and try to start over. I moved into a cheap apartment in West Hartford. The building was pretty old, always filled with a gloomy atmosphere and dark hallways. The unit I rented, 3B, was tiny, just enough room for a bed and a few boxes. I lived like a hermit, avoiding my neighbors and relying on whiskey to help me pass out every night. On my very first night, I was jolted awake by a woman's scream.
"Stop! Please, don't do this!"
I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my chest, drenched in a cold sweat. The voice definitely came from unit number 7. My apartment was at the very end of the hall, so it had to be coming from there. Suddenly, a massive thud hit the wall, like something heavy being thrown, making my entire room shake. I ran out into the hallway and stood trembling in front of door number 7. When I pressed my ear against the wood, I could clearly hear someone sobbing inside. But the apartment was dark. There were no lights under the door and no sign of life. I pounded on the door and yelled, "Hey, is anyone in there? I'm calling the cops." No one answered. The sobbing and begging just continued. I decided I couldn't ignore it, so I called the police and the landlord. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes. I told them everything I heard. The police knocked, but there was no response. A few minutes later, the landlord showed up. As she unlocked the door, she grumbled about being woken up so late. "This unit has been completely vacant since 2018, she said. "No one has even toured it in a year. Have you been drinking again, sir?" Sure enough, the inside was completely empty. There was no furniture, no people, just thick dust and a bone-chilling silence. The police looked at me, then looked at the whiskey bottle sitting on my table through my cracked open door. They shook their heads and left, suggesting I go see a doctor. I stood alone in the hallway, feeling like a total madman, but the screams didn't stop. Every night, at exactly 2 a.m., it started again. It was always that same voice, followed by the same painful begging. I began to suffer from severe insomnia. The daylight started to feel blinding and fake. I quit my job. My entire world shrank down to those 4 moldy walls and my obsession with the invisible woman next door. The lack of sleep began to warp my vision. One afternoon, I swore I saw a deep red, bloody handprint smeared on the neighbor's doorframe. I blinked, and it vanished. Then I started seeing shadows darting past the corner of my eye while I was at the stove. Sometimes I felt like someone was standing right behind me, their warm breath brushing against the back of my neck. Finally, I started hearing soft footsteps on the hardwood floors while I lay in bed, as if someone was pacing circles around my room in the dark. I knew I was losing my mind, but I couldn't stop the spiral. After nearly a month of this, I decided to end it. I downed a whole bottle of bourbon, grabbed a crowbar I kept under my bed, and turned on the voice recorder app on my phone. I tucked the phone into my pocket. When the clock struck 2 a.m. and the screaming began, I didn't hesitate. I charged into the hallway and used all my strength to smash the lock on unit number 7. I hit it over and over until the door swung wide open. I stepped into the middle of the empty room and clicked on my flashlight. It was the same wreckage as before. Nobody was there. I stood still, sweat pouring down my face like rain. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording I just made, to prove I wasn't crazy. But then, from the speaker, a voice rang out.
Stop it, Logan.
My heart stopped beating. It was my wife's voice. I collapsed to my knees for air. I looked around the empty room again, and suddenly, a horrifying wave of familiarity washed over me. My wife's voice kept playing from the phone, begging me to stop. In that moment, the memories came rushing back like a black flood. My wife and I had lived right here. This was our home, unit number 7. 8 years ago, at exactly 2 a.m. on a cold February night, she had packed her bags to leave me after years of my abuse. In a drunken rage, I had ended everything.
It was a late weekend evening in October, and I decided to stop by Popeyes to grab dinner for a perfect horror movie night. I live in an old apartment building on the outskirts of the city. It's the kind of 3-story building with long outdoor hallways that always give you a creepy, uneasy feeling after dark. I usually call a friend when I walk into the building just to feel less scared. That night was no different. I was chatting on the phone with my best friend. Just as I was stepping onto the stairs, a man suddenly came rushing down from the upper floor. He was running so fast, I only got a quick glimpse of his tall figure. I cried out and turned to the side to avoid him, but the man still slammed hard into my left shoulder, which made me stagger and almost drop my bag of food. The man turned his head and looked at me for a few seconds. I couldn't clearly see his face because his hoodie was pulled down low. Then, without a single word of apology, he continued to run off. I complained to my friend about how rude the guy was. My friend asked what happened, and I briefly explained as I continued to head upstairs. I felt like someone was watching me. I turned back, looking through the window, down to the parking lot across the street. There was a shadowy figure, but the streetlights were too dim for me to see clearly. It was probably just someone going home. My relaxing evening went exactly as planned with the fried chicken and the scary movie. I drank a few more beers and fell asleep on the couch in the living room without realizing it. A knock on the door startled me awake. I clumsily sat up, looked at the wall clock and saw it was 9 a.m. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole and was surprised to see a police officer. I opened the door, looking groggy, and asked the officer what was going on. The man politely introduced himself as an officer from the local police station. Then he explained that there had been a murder in the apartment below mine last night, and they were interviewing all residents in the area to gather clues. My mouth dropped open. I was completely shocked, stammering and repeating the word murder. The officer asked if I had noticed anything unusual like a stranger, strange noises, or anything else. Meanwhile, he opened his notebook and held his pen ready to write. I tried to recall the night before, still in a state of shock. Truthfully, nothing seemed out of the ordinary last night. That's what I answered. The officer nodded, asked a few other questions about when I got home and what I did last night, and then left. I went back inside, utterly unable to believe there was a murder right downstairs, and I hadn't known. I needed to wash my face and take a shower to wake up properly. Just as I took off my shirt and tossed it into the laundry basket, I suddenly saw something that made me freeze in place. On the left shoulder of the shirt, there was a reddish-brown stain the size of my thumb. I picked it up to look closely and was quite sure it was dried blood. Memories from last night rushed back as clearly as a rerun of a movie. This bloodstain was exactly where the man had slammed into me last night. The following deduction made my body tremble in waves. That man was the killer, his body still covered in the victim's blood. He was fleeing the scene and collided with me. Trembling, I ran to the living room and immediately called 911. I stammered a report about a murder at my apartment complex. I gave them my apartment address. The voice on the other end suddenly grew more serious. They had not received any reports of a murder at that address, and then asked me who told me about the murder. The blood in my body seemed to turn to ice, and a cold sensation washed over me from head to toe. I replied that a person claiming to be a police officer had come this morning and said they were investigating the incident. The voice on the other end interrupted me to inform me that no police officers had been dispatched to that address this morning, and the tone switched to an emergency mode as they asked me to listen carefully. Do not open the door for anyone. Lock all windows and doors. They were sending police to my location right now. Oh God, what kind of situation was I in? My voice choked up as if I were about to cry. The dispatcher, who introduced herself as Lisa, told me to keep my mace or pepper spray with me if I had any. You are doing great. I'll stay on the line with you until the police arrive, okay? I ran to the door to check the lock. I also checked the windows. They were all tightly locked. I retreated to the corner of the room furthest from the door and sat down, trying to breathe steadily as Lisa instructed over the phone. Finally, the sound of police sirens blared from outside, and I sighed with relief. Then a loud knock on the door with a man's voice. Police! Hannah, are you there? I looked through the peephole one last time, confirming it was definitely the police before opening the door. I recounted the entire event in as much detail as possible. The police officer took careful notes and then offered a hypothesis that sent shivers down my spine again. The man who collided with me last night could have been the killer. He had just left the scene, with the victim's blood still on him. And when he bumped into me, the blood accidentally got onto my shoulder. He wasn't sure if the bloodstain was left behind, so he secretly followed me from the parking lot to confirm. That's why I felt a distant gaze. That eerie feeling wasn't just my imagination. From following me, he knew exactly which apartment I lived in, and the next morning he came back, not to kill and cover his tracks, but to check. He pretended to be a police officer and asked about every detail of the night before to determine if I knew anything. If I had mentioned the collision then, or accidentally said I saw the bloodstain, I probably wouldn't have had the chance to be sitting here telling the story. I shivered, thinking back to everything. He had looked at me as if to memorize my face, or perhaps to plan something. I'd opened the door for a fake police officer. I chatted with him without any suspicion. Thank goodness for those beers, because maybe my mind was temporarily too foggy at the time. If I had said anything wrong, or reacted a little differently, I don't dare imagine what would have happened. Nearly a year has passed, and the criminal has still not been caught. The police have asked me to relocate and have placed me under special protection. Now I understand. What seem like small things are sometimes the final warning. Just a moment of doubt, or one time following your gut instinct, is enough to keep yourself safe. It's been 10 years, but I still can't forget that night. I was 11 years old, and my sister was 15. It was the weekend, and our parents had gone to a company party. They told my sister and me to stay home, lock the doors carefully, and look out for each other. But my sister had been locked in her room since the afternoon, blasting music and ignoring everyone. I was bored, so I went downstairs to the living room and turned on a movie. A long time passed, and I was totally focused on the film. Just as the police in the movie were about to expose the culprit, the entire house went dark. I froze for a few seconds, looking around at the thick blackness. I yelled my sister's name loudly, but I only heard the music, still echoing from upstairs. I called a second time, and she still didn't respond. I figured she had fallen asleep, so I decided to take action myself. I felt around for my phone on the table but couldn't find it. I must have left it in my room. A feeling of helplessness washed over me, like I was completely isolated in this dark room. Just then, a strange sound made my body freeze. It was a light scraping sound coming from the window. I stood stock still, listening to try and figure out what the sound really was. It was still just light, unidentifiable noises. A few minutes later, a voice suddenly spoke right behind me, so close that I felt a warm puff of air on the back of my neck. "Be quiet." My entire body turned to stone. It didn't sound like my sister, but I wasn't sure. I was too terrified to guess anything. I wanted to turn my head to confirm if it was her. But then a hand was placed on my shoulder, holding me still. The grip wasn't painful, but it felt like a warning. All I could do was stand still. "Don't look back," the voice commanded. I nodded like a controlled puppet. Then the person started giving me instructions. "Go down to the basement, find a hiding spot, then close your eyes, and absolutely do not move or make a sound until someone calls your name." Fear had paralyzed all my reactions. I could only obey. I reoriented myself in the space and started walking in the dark. The basement smelled musty and was freezing cold. I fumbled around and found the old cot, immediately crawling under it, curling up small, hugging my knees to my chest. The icy cement floor soaked through my clothes, making me shiver. I closed my eyes as instructed, but strangely not being able to see made all my other senses terrifyingly sharp. I heard everything. First, footsteps upstairs, the sound of doors opening and closing, and things being knocked over. Then a voice echoed down. "Is no one here?" I don't know when I drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long it was until I woke up to very loud noises from upstairs. I opened my eyes and realized I had fallen asleep. But as soon as I remembered the person's instructions, I squeezed my eyes shut again and lay still. It wasn't until I heard my mom calling out my name, filled with panic, that I dared to fully open my eyes. This time I knew someone had called my name, as instructed, but I still didn't dare crawl out, until frantic footsteps grew closer and closer. I was even more afraid, retreating deeper inside and clamping my hands over my mouth. Suddenly a flashlight beam shined directly into my face, making me squint, and a man pulled me out from under the bed. I stared blankly and realized it was a police officer. He yelled out, announcing that he had found me in the basement. The basement light turned on, and my parents and sister quickly rushed over. Immediately, my sister rushed to hug me tightly and burst into tears. She sobbed, saying she had snuck out to see a friend, and when she got home, she found the living room window shattered, things scattered everywhere, and me missing without a trace. Her voice trembled. "I screamed your name, ran all over the house, and couldn't find you anywhere. I thought you had been taken." I panicked and called the police, and my parents too. At that moment, all I could do was cry and beg for you to be safe. But you were with me. You told me to hide and be quiet. She looked at me with a confused expression. What are you talking about? I wasn't home. I went out, and when I came back, I found this. The story I heard next was truly shocking. It turned out that before the power went out, my sister had indeed snuck out to see a friend. When she left, I was focused on the movie. When she returned, she found signs that the house had been broken into. Things were messy. The living room window was smashed, and I was gone. She immediately called my parents and the police. After a while of searching, they found me, sound asleep under the cot. I insisted many times that a voice had given me orders, but no one believed me. Everyone assumed that because I was so shocked, I had hallucinated. We went back to the living room. I stared blankly at the chaotic scene around me. Another police officer came over to explain that this was a routine burglary. Some valuable items had been stolen. My parents felt lucky that no one was hurt. My sister kept apologizing to me and our parents, and I couldn't stop thinking about the person who had talked to me earlier. The following week, my parents took me to see a doctor. She explained that a child's brain is very flexible, and in a dangerous situation, it can create false memories as a self-defense mechanism. The doctor reassured us that I would slowly forget and everything would be okay, but I haven't forgotten. Even now, I vividly remember the voice of the sister who commanded me that night. I believe it was a female burglar. She probably took advantage of the power outage to sneak into the house. What she was targeting was the family's property, and she had no intention of hurting me, or perhaps didn't want to cause a bigger incident. And I still often wonder what would have happened if I had turned around that day. There are some mysteries that are best left lying still in memory, just like I once lay still under the cot, eyes closed and waiting. I have been a firefighter for 12 years, but the cruelest thing is that I couldn't save my own wife. A year ago, I was on an overnight shift. My house caught fire because of a faulty furnace. When I finally got home, it was too late. My wife died from smoke inhalation. My son survived because his bedroom was at the end of the hall. David was 9. He remembered and felt the horror of that night very clearly. For the first few months after the funeral, I thought I could handle everything. I promised I would take care of David and make up for his mom's loss. I woke up early to make his breakfast. It was usually simple stuff, like toast and eggs. He had become very withdrawn after the accident. He would sit, look at his breakfast, and then look at me. If Mom were here, I wouldn't have to eat the same 4 meals every week, right? I froze, looking at him, unable to say anything. That day, he decided to skip breakfast and just go to school. On the way to work, I started crying again. I only let myself cry in the car. I missed my wife so much, and I felt so completely helpless. The same questions kept repeating in my head. Why didn't I come home earlier? Why didn't I notice the furnace was broken? Since the accident, I started volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Each time I rushed into a fire, I felt a slight sense of relief, as if I was making amends for Sarah's death. But every time I came home and saw my son sitting alone in the living room, I felt scared. I didn't know how to talk to him. Then October came, and it was the day of David's school field day. I had promised him I would be there to cheer him on. That morning, I woke up early to pack his lunch. I made his mom's grilled chicken salad, which David always loved. But then the station got an emergency call. I quickly shoved the lunchbox into my bag and rushed out to the scene. The entire time I was on the job, I couldn't stop thinking about David. Luckily, I didn't arrive too late, but it was already past lunchtime. The stadium was loud, filled with laughter and cheers. Lots of parents were there, rooting for their kids. I found David sitting by himself, constantly looking down at the ground. I walked over quickly, trying to force a smile, "David, Dad's here." He looked up at me. There was no emotion in his eyes. I sat down next to him, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "I'm so sorry I'm late. We had a big emergency at the station, but I brought lunch." I opened my bag and took out the lunchbox. But when I lifted the lid, I froze. The food was a messy jumble. The dressing had spilled out, sticking to the sides of the container. The box must have gotten knocked around while I rushed out to the call. "Dad tried to make the dish your mom always made. But..." David looked at the ruined lunch and then at me. This time I saw an emotion in his eyes, but it was just disappointment. If Mom was alive, everything would be different. All Dad knows how to do is burn things down. That sentence felt like falling into an abyss. I couldn't get a single word out because I knew he was right. I went back to the station and thought about my wife. I wished she could come back. I took 2 tranquilizers and drifted off to sleep. And then the dream came again. I saw my wife lying in the ashes. Her hair was burnt, her facial skin was cracked, and her eye sockets were 2 empty black holes. She crawled toward me, each movement slow and painful. I smelled the burnt odor coming from her black, partially missing fingers. "Why didn't you get here in time? Why did you abandon me?" I woke up with a gasp, trying to calm myself down. The clock showed 3 a.m., and I tossed and turned until morning. On the nights that followed, the dream kept repeating. Sometimes I saw myself standing in front of the burning house, hearing my wife and son calling for help inside, but I couldn't move. The fire swallowed everything. Thick black smoke billowed from the windows, and I just stood there, helpless. I started to be afraid of going to sleep. I took more tranquilizers every night, but they only made the nightmares more real. They didn't make them go away. I knew my body was breaking down, but I couldn't tell anyone. David wasn't doing any better. He was getting thinner by the day. His teacher called and said he always sat alone in class, sometimes staring out the window with an empty look. I was truly helpless. Both of us were trapped in our own private pain. The next morning, I was at the station when we got a call about a fire at David's school. I immediately bolted to the parking lot. My colleagues called out to me, but I didn't listen. All I could see was the image of my son trapped in the flames. I had only one thought. I won't lose anyone else this time. When I got to the school, the fire had already spread to the 2nd floor. The scene was pure chaos. I jumped out of the truck, grabbed my oxygen mask, and ran straight into the fire. David's classroom was at the end of the hall. The smoke was so dense, I could only see a few feet in front of me. I crawled on the floor, yelling my son's name. The fire crackled, and the ceilings groaned, signaling they were about to collapse. I crawled even faster. At the end of the hall, I saw him huddled in a corner. When he heard my voice, he opened his eyes. I crawled to him, hugged him, took off my turnout coat, and wrapped David inside it. Then I stood up and ran. Flames leaped up on both sides, but I didn't stop. I held my son tight and ran straight through the fire. Thank God we made it out. We both collapsed onto the grass. My crew immediately helped, and the ambulance was right there. I heard David crying and repeatedly calling for Dad. I held him, whispering, "I'm sorry I wasn't there when your mom and you needed me most." David hugged me back, and in that moment, I felt a sense of relief. David and I both had some burns, but luckily, nothing serious. No one died in the fire. That's truly the best outcome for firefighters like us. That night, in the hospital room, David slept on the bed next to me. Sleep was no longer terrifying for me. I saw our familiar kitchen, and my wife was standing by the stove. She was making the grilled chicken salad. She looked at me and smiled. Thank you for not giving up. I know I can't change the past, but I still have a chance to get things right now. We will always carry the memory of our happy family of 3. Some wounds never completely heal, but a strong enough love can help us learn how to keep moving forward, even with the burns still in our hearts.
Thank you for watching until the end. As mentioned earlier, our goal of reaching 50,000 subscribers in 2026 is still ongoing. If you enjoy these stories, please give us a hand and support us.